Was I wrong when I said that the Bible nowhere represents an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent God? Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. In my video number McClellan 1638, that's what I said the Bible does not represent. I also pointed out that the Bible in many places limits the power, the presence, and the knowledge of God. God is asking questions. God changes their mind in light of changing circumstances. God is defeated in battle in 2 Kings 3, as another video of mine demonstrates. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no place where the Bible asserts an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent God, because the Bible is not univocal. I had a lot of people respond quoting a lot of passages from the Bible at me, and they can be divided into three general categories. The title Pantocrator, the use of the word panta, meaning all things, and then these passages that are supposed to represent omnipresence. Now, regarding the title Pantocrator, this is a traditional title for divinity that comes from Greek religion. It was borrowed into Judaism through the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, which actually just adds it in. It's not translating any Hebrew word. It's just being added in and adopted as a title for God, likely because in Greek religion it is generally used to refer to somebody who's at the top of the pantheon. And Pantocrator literally means one who has all sovereignty or sovereign over all. And this is not necessarily the same thing as the modern doctrine of omnipotence. And this is one of the issues with most of the quotations that have been thrown in my face. That is that the doctrine of omnipotence is a carefully worked out philosophical and conceptual package. It's not just a title, but an entire package that is built upon this concept of having sovereignty over all, or having all sovereignty. And we see this package being developed within early Christianity as early apologists and patristic authors and philosophers build from this scratch foundation of this title. Its title in Greek religion is used to refer to different deities within the same text. It's just a title there. And we have absolutely no indication that it is functioning as anything other than a title when it's used in the Septuagint, when it's adopted in the New Testament. See, there's a difference between a title and the later developed doctrine that sits on the foundation of that title. And what happens is people on the other side of that development will frequently look at the title, and because from their vantage point the title is inextricably connected with that doctrine, they think that any occurrence of that title evokes the entire conceptual package that wasn't even developed until much later. And so that's a common fallacy when people try to interpret the Bible. They're looking through later lenses at an earlier literary layer and thinking that those later lenses are contemporaneous with the actual composition of that literary layer. So the title Pantocrator does not demonstrate in any way, shape, or form the philosophical doctrine of omnipotence. Now, with the phrase panta, which means all things, we're dealing with the problem of hyperbolic rhetoric, because in many places throughout the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, all things or all or everything or something like that is frequently used in hyperbolic ways. For instance, in Acts 2 at the Pentecost, it says that there were people from all nations under heaven in Jerusalem. That's clearly hyperbole. We have statements in the Hebrew Bible, for instance, the Tower of Babel. God says that if the people are successful in building this tower, and it seems like they're going to be, nothing will be impossible to them. That's not suggesting they will become omnipotent. It means that they will become divine, and a prototypical feature of divinity is sovereignty, which is hyperbolically represented as nothing being impossible to them. Similarly, Adam and Eve, when they eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is representing a merism there, all knowledge from the good to the evil, all access to strategic information. God acknowledges that they have become, like the gods, knowing good and evil. In other words, knowing all things. Adam and Eve were not omniscient. It's hyperbole. Similarly, in the New Testament, Jesus says that all things are possible to the person who believes. This does not mean a person who believes is omnipotent. But if we take all things are possible as a declaration of the philosophical, conceptual package of the modern doctrine of omnipotence, that's precisely what that would have to mean. And people are going to say, well, yeah, it just means all things are possible through God, since God is omnipotent. It doesn't matter if the omnipotence is innate or communicated to somebody. It's still a declaration of omnipotence according to that line of reasoning. It still means that someone who believes should be able to fly, should be able to travel through time, should be able to create new worlds, should be able to do all these things. Very clearly can't, because that is hyperbole. Similarly, we have statements about Jesus saying, I told you all things, or the Spirit will teach you all things, or the woman at the well saying, come see this dude who told me all things that I ever did. This is all hyperbole, because that word panta is primarily a rhetorical word. It is almost never being used in a strict philosophical sense of absolutely all things. Yes, I mean all things. I've thought about it, and I mean all things. That is philosophical thinking. That is considering the implications, considering the contours, considering the scope, considering the extent. And that is not something that many authors who wrote for the Bible did. That philosophical thinking is very, very rare in the biblical text. And it really only occurs to differing degrees in texts that were written in the Greco-Roman period or after. That is, Greco-Roman period Jewish texts and New Testament texts. And not all of them, but just those written by authors who were more philosophically oriented. And so the closest I would say you get to an exception to what I said is maybe 1 John 3:20. Which says that God knows all things. But again, that word panta is overwhelmingly used hyperbolically. And so that is not a demonstration of the philosophical and conceptual package of the modern doctrine of omniscience. Now, when it comes to omnipresence, I stated that the Bible frequently says God has access to all area. God can perceive all places. That is not an assertion that God's presence actually pervades all places, because God's presence is repeatedly and consistently represented throughout the entire Bible as being located in a specific point in time and place, even if God can perceive all things. And no, his eyes are in all places is not an exception. That's rhetoric. The notion that God fills the heavens and the earth is not a declaration of a philosophical concept of omnipresence. It is rhetoric. Just like Isaiah saying, the heavens are my throne and the earth is my footstool. This is not a literal declaration that God sits upon a throne-shaped heaven and has their feet resting on the surface of the earth. It is rhetoric, and we see it in other ancient Southwest Asian literature as well, where the gods are represented as gigantic and taking steps that leave huge craters in the earth and dragging things that create the mighty rivers and all this kind of stuff. So this is rhetoric. It is not the carefully worked out philosophical and conceptual package of the modern doctrine of omnipresence. And when folks misunderstand a title or a piece of hyperbolic rhetoric for that whole conceptual package, that is the product of looking back at the Bible through the interpretive lenses that were developed by later generations. And that's one of the biggest things I'm trying to correct about the way people approach the Bible.